Welcome all to the second day of Optimize 25. We are delighted you are here and we have a packed agenda today. If you missed any sessions from yesterday, those recordings are now on demand on the registration page for the event. My name is Chloe Norwood. I am the Field Marketing Manager here at Visible Thread. Before we begin, our speakers will be taking questions throughout the discussion. Please submit any questions you have to the Q&A box. Feel free to utilize the attendee chat and free content box where we've included some resources from our website. There is a survey on the right side of your screen. Make sure to fill that out and leave any feedback before the session ends. The slides and recording of this session will be available after the event ends. And I'm thrilled to introduce our first session of the day, FAR Overhaul, Stop Whining and Start Winning. And now I will pass it over to our moderator for this session, Ton Wilson, President of Intellect.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Chloe, for the introduction here, and thanks to Visible Thread for their leadership. I love speaking at this event every year. Aaron and I were on earlier this year, and we thought, well, why not bring the whole team back together and then add on a third? So we also have Sam Lee on here today. And so those who know and follow me know that I love to speak on my podcast on Ton's 2 cents, and I've had both of them speak. And so today I think we're going to get really down and dirty into some of the changes, how it impacts industry, maybe commiserate a little bit, and I might throw in a couple of shutdown questions in here just to kind of, make it a little bit fun for today. But between the overhaul and the shutdown, there's a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, the shift in acquisition priorities, it really feels like the landscape is kind of changing as we're, under our feet every single day. And so what does that mean for industry, and how is that going to impact business in general? So before we get too far into this, I'm going to let my other co-panelists introduce themselves. But for those who don't know me, I'm Ton Wilson, President of Intellect and Ton's 2 Cents podcast. We do BD, capture, proposal, consulting, support, price to win at Intellect. And so with that, I'm going to shift it over to my partner in crime, Aaron Tilock.
You started with my partner in crime, and I'm not sure which of the two of us was going to go next. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Aaron Tilock. I'm the Chief Growth Officer of Quanbear IT Solutions. We are an information technology services provider. We perform cybersecurity, software systems implementation, system sustainment, and senior advisory and consulting support. We are an Alaskan Native corporation supporting the Cake tribe in Alaska. I started in this business, 29 years ago as a Defense Department 1102 series contract specialist and contracting officer. So I geek out on the FAR. I am a purist, a bit on the conservative side of the spectrum about the FAR. So I've got some concerns about overhauls and making sure that nothing gets broken. Pivoted into industry after about 5 years of doing contracting work. I've worked at large and small businesses, and today I lead up the business development, proposal management, and contract teams for Quanbear IT.
Thanks, Aaron. And Sam?
Thanks, Ton, and thanks for having me, Visible Thread. Really appreciate me being on the panel. Thank you. I'm here in Fairfax, Virginia. I have a law office here, and I also run a website, GovCon Intelligence, that has a newsletter, podcast, and videos about small business contracting. Prior to starting my law office, I was at the SBA. I was the director of procurement policy there, and I was actually one of the representatives to the FAR from SBA. And if you go now to the website for the FAR, my name is still there about 6 months after I left SBA as the small business representative to the FAR. So very interested in what's going on with the overhaul, as Aaron said, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who didn't catch my podcast with Sam, that was a lot of fun because there was a little bit of pointing and blaming and laughter about some of the changes in the FAR while he was at the SBA. So this is going to be a fun panel here, and we're going to get a little policy wonky, but at the same time, we're always going to talk about strategically how is that going to impact industry. So I think we have a really good balance here between understanding the different changes. And so let's kind of set the scene here for our discussion here this morning. And Sam, I'm going to start off with you because I love following your LinkedIn Lives and your website and all the changes, because it's literally like, you can't keep up with changes. And they happen every day and so fast with this administration too. I think like the pace at which the changes have happened is, kind of unseen in prior administrations. But what do you think? What is kind of driving some of these changes, and what do you think is like the real intent behind them? We hear what the intent is, but deep down, what is the intent? And like, how does like the current climate with the shutdown and with the all the changes in the administration, how does that kind of affect some of these updates on that rollout? So kind of give us where we are here.
Absolutely. There's really two things that are happening. One is what they say is the purpose of the FAR overhaul, as you said, the public intent of the FAR overhaul. And then when you actually see what's in the documents, you get another perception of what's going on. So first with the public intent. So the public intent is to basically make the FAR great again. It's to whittle down the regulation to what they say is the statutory basis, like what Congress passed, what the president signed, get rid of all the discretionary policies and things that contracting officers may or may not do. Instead, it's try to shorten it as much as possible so that it's just what is in the legislation, what's in the law. So that's the public intent. That's the idea of whittling down the FAR to get rid of what they called the onerous bureaucracy, put the bureaucrats like I used to be on the sideline and just put in what Congress intended. But when you actually look at the documents that the FAR has released, there's a lot more that's going on. There's policy changes, and I think we'll get into some of the policy changes on the 8A program, on what the administration apparently considers to be DEI. But more to the point with the shutdown and some of the changes that DOJ has been making, the FAR changes want to make the system more efficient in that it does not have to rely on individual government employees. So we're talking about people in the OSDBU offices, those are small business specialists. We're talking about contracting officer staff having fewer contracts to administer so that you can whittle down the number of 1102s as Aaron used to be. When you look at particularly the changes with small business and the changes with some of the sections that deal with required contracts, Part 8 and Part 16, the idea is let's limit the number of contracts, let's limit the number of contractors. That's the category management idea that we've all been dealing with for maybe the last 10 years now. Let's double down on category management, and let's create a system where an agency can go from an opportunity to an award in months or weeks instead of in years. So try to make the system faster and limit the reliance on government employees. And we'll see that when you look at the small business changes, moving away in some cases from 8A to some of the other programs, and even moving away from the socioeconomic programs and relying more on small business set-asides to the extent that agencies would use those. So you have these two intents, and trying to mesh those together and understand really what the FAR is trying to get accomplished requires reading between the lines on the documents that they've released.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this whole topic is a whole day session type of discussion. So unfortunately, we can't go too far into, the intent and the actual changes, which I would love to do. But, Aaron, from your perspective, from industry, what is your, how do some of these changes and uncertainties kind of influence how companies should look at qualifying opportunities, look at positioning? Because, business as usual has really kind of changed, and now you're trying to read the tea leaves, into like, how do you project that into some of the out years or even next year or even next month? So it's a very different game, different climate right now.
Yeah, definitely more change in the last, let's say, 6, 8, 10 months than I've seen in the last 29 years together. And that does cause a little bit of whiplash. One of the things about streamlining the FAR, as Sam was talking about, was a lot of the things getting removed served kind of a predictability function, a buffering that made the marketplace a little slow, perhaps a little dull, but very easy to predict what the government would do, how they would do it. When we implement a lot of change on the contracting professionals, particularly within the government, that's going to require a lot of acculturation, training, just settling in and getting used to things. And as part of that, there's a FAR companion that is supposed to accompany each of these FAR sections that are changing. That's going to become an exceptionally critical document for contracting officers, contract specialists to look at and rely upon. But I'm amused by the title of our session today in particular, because fundamentally, if your company is in the federal space and only in the federal space, you have no other alternative than to roll with those punches, figure it out, find your way through. So sitting back and waiting to see how those tea leaves settle out, if I can steal your metaphor, is not really an option for us. We have to keep pressing ahead. One of the changes I've seen already is the government engaging us in industry saying, please explain these changes to me. And that tells me that the rollout of the revolutionary FAR overhaul was not done maybe as carefully as I might have recommended. Definitely kind of coming out quickly. It makes for must-see TV via LinkedIn as the LinkedIn cognoscente start weighing in on what those changes mean and how fast they can read through the new regs to tell us what it means. That kind of disruption or perturbation makes things just a little interesting right now.
Yeah. Aren't we glad that we have AI and other products and tools and like Visible Thread to kind of do the shredding for me, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, exactly. So, let's kind of, Sam, let's kind of break this down a little bit further. I said that we weren't going to go too far, but we do have some time here to discuss about some of these key shifts and changes. And so what, if you were to pick, like, what do you think are like the top 3 proposed FAR changes that could impact small businesses or primes?
There are 3 significant areas that I've written about on GovCon Intelligence. The one is set-asides. The FAR kept the rule of 2, which is the rule that requires set-asides if there are 2 or more small businesses that qualify for the contract. So it's still important to be a small business. Maybe it's not as important to be 8A and the socioeconomic categories, but very important to be a small business because those set-asides are staying around at the contract level. There's some nuances on that. The rule of 2 applies to contracts, but not to orders, and that'll kind of get fleshed out, perhaps even at the courts in the future. Number 2 is on the 8A program. The FAR has changed the 8A program to more of a competitive program, and it's put it in the same parity category as the other socioeconomic categories: hub-owned, women-owned, and service-able event. The confusion there is, although the FAR has made these changes, SBA has not made the change. And SBA runs the 8A program. So there's going to be a conflict for some period of time between what the FAR says and what SBA says in its relationship with the agencies. And that may be something that lawyers have to get involved, litigation, SBA has to come out with something. So we're in this holding period for a while until SBA comes back and perhaps makes a change or says it wasn't really a change. And then the third important area is in support for new companies that are coming in, maybe subcontractors or companies that have been doing state and local and want to come in on federal. A lot of that support is being pulled away, with OSDBUs and small business specialists being diminished. You've seen in some offices, HHS went down to 1, Air Force is reportedly going down to 1 for small business specialists. So there are other areas. Apex accelerators really need to step up. SBA on its side with the PCRs and their assistance programs need to step up to be able to help companies that are on the outside looking in try to get into government contracting. And the harder part of that is going to be as the government moves to consolidated contracts, like category management vehicles and best in class or required use vehicles. You almost need to have a spot on those if you're selling something that they consider to be a commodity, like IT services or professional services. The government's going to look to those vehicles first before they look at creating their own contracts.
Yeah. So, Aaron, when you hear some of these shifts, we've talked a lot about this, and part of me kind of wants to bring in the whole ATI controversy, but I digress. I'm not gonna do that. But yes, let's do. But when you hear about some of these shifts, like, how do you coach or run BD teams and capture teams, like in this environment? Are we pivoting strategies? Like, what are some of the smart companies? What are they doing in order to kind of, stay ahead and still be competitive? Because I know some companies really lean heavily on some of these set asides, and you know how I feel about set asides. I think everyone should compete and be competitive, while having some of these, advantages to kind of help the smaller businesses kind of grow.
Yeah, I don't think the two ideas are out of harmony with each other. It is the longstanding policy of the United States government to compete with their requirements to the maximum opportunity practicable. It is also the policy of the United States government to support small business development to the maximum opportunity practicable. So if you're running your small business with a little more than a mindset of grabbing sole source awards, and this is particularly relevant to Alaskan Native corporations like mine, you better learn how to compete. I think that tide is definitely turning. It's something that within our own team, we are gearing up for in particular. We do have our fair share of direct awards. It's an easy button. It's an expeditious path for government contracting officers. But to Sam's point earlier, I think that path is been changed now with the new Part 19 rewrite to indicate a stronger preference for competing work among 8As. So, I mentioned I'm kind of a far purist. I do like my set-asides, but part of the reasoning behind that is that it's a really big marketplace. So if your firm is not a service-disabled veteran-owned small business and you are boxed out of service-disabled veteran-owned small business competitions, there's plenty of other opportunities for you elsewhere. And it is a big federal marketplace. So if there are set-asides, it doesn't necessarily limit the size of the marketplace for other types of companies, including other types of small businesses. You just go where the fishing or the hunting is best. So the idea of kind of just getting rid of some of our preference programs, those 8A woman-owned service-disabled veteran or hub zone programs, and making everything, at best a small business set aside, if not full and open competition, it's going to cut the other direction from literally decades of process within the federal government for how work gets competed. And we're going to have to roll with those changes.
Yeah, and I think I want to go back to something that Sam had brought up before, because this kind of plays into this discussion about the set-asides, is the rule of two. And we really, I think that's one of those things where that and the ostensible subcontracting, requirement are two of my biggest, biggest things that I am very sensitive about. And, okay, fine, I'll bring up the ATI controversy, but there are, let's do that, right? Because it's current events. It's something that is going to, be impactful. I think, Sam, you wrote about how quickly the SBA moved. And so for our listeners here who aren't familiar with the ATI controversy, ATI is is an Alaskan Native, Aaron, company. And they were videoed on James O'Keefe's video talking about how they circumvented or on paper approached subcontracting in a not so ethical kind of way, and using their 8A set-asides to get a lot of work, and then pass it through to other people who would not normally get that contract. So, with SBA sanctioning and canceling the ATI contracts, with the changes in the overhaul, this administration is moving really quickly. So how does that, obviously that's going to impact the ostensible subcontracting, the rule of two. Talk to me about some of the changes in the FAR on that, and where we, is there going to be outfall on this, considering there's already been changes and updates to the FAR on this?
Yeah, I would say that compliance has always been a challenge for the government. We are far many more companies than there are government people watching to make sure that the rules are being followed. But the best oversight is competition. If one of us sees another company getting an advantage that's improper, we're going to call foul on that. And so for that reason, smart companies, most companies, the overwhelming majority of companies are very familiar with and do follow the regulations. If you get thrown out of the federal marketplace, your company is going to have to really scramble to find commercial work or go out of business. So we talk about the Washington Post test for those companies in the DC metro area. You do not want to have your company wind up on the front page of the Washington Post by doing stupid illegal things. So we'll self-regulate. We will make sure that we follow all of the rules and follow them closely so that we avoid those kinds of bad outcomes, bad publicity, or getting tossed out of the whole market.
Yeah. Sam?
Let me throw my lawyer card down and say, look,
it's
not clear that ATI did anything wrong in this, or at least anything illegal. They certainly, whoever was on that video should not be talking to a guy with such a ridiculous wig. That is a crime in itself, the wig. But the fact that they say that we subcontracted 80% is not necessarily illegal. There's a statute, there's a law that says you can subcontract. And in some cases, it says you can subcontract up to 85% of your contract. The 50% rule is called limitation on subcontracting. And that applies to services and supply contracts, but it has exceptions. So if you're an 8A firm like ATI Government Solutions is, and you subcontract to other 8A firms, that's okay. You can subcontract 100%, 90% to other 8A firms, and that's okay. You could be in a mentor-protege agreement and pass on 80% of your work as long as you're the protege in that contract. So SBA came out with this suspension very quickly. Now, maybe they looked into things. People are on furlough, so they don't have all the other responsibilities. So maybe within that 24-hour period, they were able to look through the contracts. But there was no mention in those videos of specific contracts. And in order to find a violation of the law, the limitations on subcontracting, you have to actually look at the contracts and see what the contracts require, what the subcontracts were. There may be more that's coming out. ATI had 30 days from the suspension, which was 2 weeks ago, to come back to SBA with reasons why they should not be suspended from new government contracts and options and orders. And I expect that they'll do that within that 30-day period. And we may find out, maybe that 80% is okay, or maybe it wasn't 80%. Maybe these are just people talking because they don't really know what's going on. The lesson, I think, for companies that are going after these contracts is you have to understand now that SBA has put a target on the 8A program's back. Already, they've put out letters and press releases about fraud in the 8A program, alleged fraud in the 8A program. So if you're 8A or you're in these socioeconomic programs, you really have to understand what the limitations on subcontracting means, what the legal responsibilities are. These are rules that don't apply to normal kind of full and open contracts with large business. They're only for small business contracts. And in some cases, there's special rules that apply to the 8A program. Like if you get sold in the 8A program, you sell a majority of your company, you have to report that to the government. You don't necessarily have to do that in other scenarios, but you do have to do that in the 8A program. So companies that are getting these contracts, particularly if they're sole source and you're not in competition, as Aaron mentioned, you have to understand what the responsibilities are, because the government now has made clear they're watching and they're going to take every opportunity to highlight fraud or inconsistencies or wrongdoing in the 8A program.
Yeah, that idea of, hey, this program is wrought with fraud, no, just no. Ton, you and I were engaging in a LinkedIn post where somebody said, finally, the 8As are getting what's coming to them. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. To the person who had posted this thing originally, go ahead and look. Again, the overwhelming majority of companies know exactly what those rules are and are complying with those rules at all times. Not because we're nice people, we're that too, but because the penalties if you get caught out of compliance can be so onerous as to be a death knell for your company. We must comply. So, we know what those rules are. ATI case, it tells me I better make sure that my people also know how we comply with rules. If they've got questions in their mind about how things work, I've got a responsibility to teach, guide, and coach them so that they understand that, yes, we know what the rules are, and yes, we are following them. We always follow them.
Yeah. And I think with all these changes, organizations and companies like Visible Thread, NCMA, APMP, it's so important for you to stay in the know with associations, with organizations like SAM, and others in our industry who are following and tracking this, because we're learning every day and we're trying to reapply and reinterpret. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not pinging one of these two men here about how am I interpreting this? Am I, am I understanding this properly? And with the contracting workforce, with diminished 1102s, with the greening of the force, with like new and different contracting officers who are, in the workforce, like they need to kind of learn. They don't have a lot of the luxuries of having been through, several iterations of some of these changes and know really kind of what the intent of, what this clause means, or, and so I guess now is really a good time for AI to be able to kind of help, discuss some of these things, but AI is wrong a lot of the times too. So, you gotta make sure that you trust but verify. But I want to kind of talk a little bit about, like acting now and not later, and go a little bit tactical, because, let's be real here. A lot of our audience members and our attendees here sit in, roles where they're performing on, on contract, on programs, but they're also writing proposals, and then they're doing BD and capture in their spare time. So, we're wearing many hats, but, like if you're leading a small business or a growth team, like what should a company, like do this quarter to kind of prepare, not only from a compliance perspective, but also from like a BD capture perspective. So Sam, you want to kind of kick this off here a little bit?
Sure. The number one change in the federal government is the reduction in staff. There's a 50% reduction in staff at SBA. 1102s have retired or been riffed or moved. So from the BD side and from the small business side, you just have to realize things are going to take longer, and they're going to involve more kind of complication in working with the federal government. You're just not going to get those responses from contracting officers in the way that you might have been accustomed to. So what that means is you really have to put your best face forward at the first instance. You're not going to necessarily get the discussion period, or whatever it's called now, negotiations. You're not necessarily going to get clarifications from the government. Like they may just go ahead to award right away. So you have to make sure that you have checked all those boxes and made all those requirements. And the government, if you don't fill out some particular form, or you don't answer a question, they can just throw your proposal out. So you have to make sure that you have gone down the entire checklist of every possible thing that you need to do for that proposal to get it in, because you're not going to get the same level of service or response from the government side. And then on the other side, with compliance, particularly on the small business side, as you mentioned, the government doesn't necessarily know, the 1102s don't necessarily understand all the small business rules, and you don't now have the small business specialists and the OSDBUs in full force to help them through that process. So you're seeing now set-asides that come out with confusing designations, multiple designations. The government people don't necessarily know who's certified and who's not. So there may be some hand-holding necessary from the small business side with the government to say, oh, this is the way you run that program, or this is the way you do a sole source with the 8A district office official at SBA. The 1102 will not necessarily have that information, and they won't necessarily have the small business specialist to help them. So it's up to the small business offeror to help them through that process.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and this is one of the things that really gets me, is that I always encourage questions early and often in the process, during the capture process, during the pre-RFP process, and even after the RFP has been released. And so I think a lot of organizations take this very passive, approach, and that, oh, well, someone will ask that question, or it's so obvious that, I don't want to pile on and ask the question. If you wait for someone to ask the question or to get clarification, and it may not happen, now you've lost your opportunity and your time to potentially, do a pre-award protest. And again, this is not a conversation on protesting, but time matters, right? Like sitting and waiting for clarifications, or sitting and waiting for someone else to ask the question, could be really detrimental to your own viability to protest at some point, if it's severe enough to kind of do that. But I think that's the reason why I think Q&A periods where you're able to speak to the program in the contracting shop is so critical, that is one of those lost art type of approaches. And so, Aaron, I'm gonna let you kind of chime in, because waiting too soon or reacting could really kind of be detrimental to our bid and capture teams.
Yeah, I think you both make really interesting points here that tie together with one another. One is, if you're running into RFPs, solicitations coming out with wrinkles to them, things that aren't quite clear, the only way to really get that clarity is through the Q&A process. And that's going to put a little forcing function on your bid no bid decision. That RFP comes out, you really want to know if you're going to go at it faster than maybe ever before, so that you can get those questions in and have a chance of getting them answered. More so than protecting your rights for pre-proposal protests, I'm much more interested in just getting the information, or getting the RFP amended to correct for inconsistencies, things that happen. The 1102 series across the Defense Department in particular is not seeing a whole lot of folks sticking around, and not seeing people waiting to get jobs as contracting types in the Defense Department. So they too are having their numbers reduced through DOGE initiatives. There are fewer of them. And so I really see a swinging of the pendulum, if you will, from the government knows everything that they're supposed to know and they tell us, to a little bit more of a give and take, where you occasionally have to engage with those contract specialists, contracting officers, and say, hey, this isn't quite right, and here's why. Try and do that respectfully, maybe try and do that outside of the formal Q&A process of an active solicitation, but help them along the way as well. I'm hopeful that they're open to those kinds of dialogues, where we're just helping them out, helping them weather the pace of change right now, helping them be better at what they do.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the way the tide is moving, especially with this administration's, they love to move quickly. OTAs and SIVers, I think, are going to be at the forefront of, if you can't spell it, if you don't know what those two terms are, I highly recommend that you learn quickly. But obviously it's not going to apply to every industry. But yeah, we are moving towards a quicker, leaner, faster, very untraditional type of ways of, of procuring. With the FAR overhaul, we're going to see, much more of that. So it's a win-win for certain parts of the industry. It's a learning curve for other parts. But I was at a Homeland Security event this week, where there were some former members of FEMA and CBP who were speaking, and they like what they're seeing. They like that. And so there are advantages, obviously, to businesses to go in and kind of influence how to actually be a partner in solving a problem. So industry tends to be a little reactive sometimes. We like to just kind of wait and respond. But the true companies that are very successful are there influencing, providing solutions, being a partner, because the government is very, they don't know which way they should go. And so with technologies changing so quickly, and now with the FAR overhaul, they even need more and more guidance from industry.
Absolutely. And
really
one of my big takeaways, go ahead, Sam.
Just that everything's a reset now because of the FAR overhaul. You have people that have been in contracting for decades, but some of their experience and their know-how kind of goes out the window because the FAR is new, all the numbers are new, the policies are new, you have new vehicles that are coming through, and something we haven't mentioned is the consolidation of GSA too. So now you're dealing with a whole different staff as compared to before when it was being handled at the agency level. So that creates a new opportunity for companies that are familiar with the process and kind of help agencies and contracting officers and program managers through this new process.
Yeah, you brought up consolidation. I wasn't going to go down and have a consolidation conversation, but this is, a process that's been evolving. It's kind of hitting a crescendo here of, yes, we're going to consolidate. This has kind of caught some companies a little off guard. Others were kind of like prepared for it to go this way. Aaron, were you going to make a comment about that, or were you going to tack on something different?
I was going to tack on something different, kind of tied to the point that Sam was making. With this pace of change, the one thing I'm doing differently than I've ever really done in a few decades is I'm reading more and watching more webcasts, those kinds of things. I'm devouring information, trying to figure out what is right and what is true. And hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll show you what I specifically read every day. It does include both of your pieces. So I watch my Ton's 2 cents. I am a subscriber of GovCon Intelligence. I recommend both highly to anybody on the session today, but others as well. And watch those folks on LinkedIn who are, no kidding, authoritative. There are some really well-qualified prior government officials who are telling you what they see in the revolutionary far overhaul, what they see changing, what they're worried about, and then triangulate that information. It is an excellent way to stay as atop as you can of all these changes coming out.
Yeah. So you do bring up a really good point. And Sam, I am remiss in not sitting down and making some definitions and defining certain things when we first started this conversation. Me, I like to just like dive in and be damned and, we'll go where we go. But I think that there's some misunderstanding, or maybe some people who don't understand with the FAR overhaul. All the parties that are involved, who's really kind of leading it, and who's part of the FAR Council. Like we throw that term out. It's like, oh, the FAR Council. There's a lot of misinformation about like this, the SBA owns this and drives this, or, like who has the authority in this whole like process. But talk to us a little bit about like the FAR Council and the SBA, the relationship, who trumps what, who has, overall authority and say, and how some of these changes occur and will go into effect.
There is a bit of Shakespearean drama with the FAR overhaul and this whole new drafting process. Back in January, so that's really not that long time. It's 10 months ago, right? January, the FAR came out with some small business policies. They were going to apply the rule of 2 on orders. They were going to require that companies be qualified as small businesses at the time of the task order. Those were SBA-led policies. So at that point in time, January 2025, just 10 months ago, SBA seemingly had the upper hand. It was really SBA trying to push small business, had the ear of the people in power, and was able to get small business proposals through. But now, when you see the FAR overall, they reversed most of those. Rule 2 does not apply to orders. You're not going to require companies be small at the time of order. It goes back to the contract. So who's in charge now? Well, the FAR Council has 3 members. It's Department of Defense or Department of War, if you prefer, GSA, and NASA. For the most part, it's really GSA that's been in control, because when you see these FAR overhaul sessions come out, or the sections come out, it's GSA that immediately comes out with a memo and says, we're putting this into place. Larry Allen's been on podcasts, videos all over the place. You see him everywhere. He's the Associate Administrator of GSA for government-wide policy, and he's explaining things and saying, we're going to make these additional changes. You don't see Department of Defense, Department of War out there doing the same thing. In fact, DoD has not implemented any of the changes in the FAR overhaul to date. I think they're waiting until they become finalized, because really all the FAR overhaul is a website. You put stuff on a website. They've changed things on the website, and you look in one day and the next day it's something different. So DoD is not willing to put into law, into operation, changes that might be different depending on what's on the website the next day. NASA hasn't been out there as well. I'm not certain what NASA's role is. So GSA is in charge, and the dramatic part of this, the Shakespearean part of this, is that the FAR is changing to make GSA more important. The FAR is putting into place this term, talking about definitions, required use contracts. Those are what they sound like. Agencies are going to have to use those contracts, and most likely those are going to be GSA contracts. And guess what? GSA gets paid a little bit off the top whenever an agency uses one of those contracts.
Yeah, so I did see, and don't quote me, but I did read somewhere in one of my many listservy things that I get that the Defense Secretary Hegseth is going to be addressing and making acquisition announcements on Friday. And so I think we're going to hear something on Friday about some of the acquisition shakeups over at the DOW. So if I can find it, I'll post it. But yes, it is supposed to happen on Friday.
Yeah, there was a leaked memo, and the press secretary said we don't comment on leaked memos, but it is likely that we'll see something later on this week.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't in my Signal group, so apparently I'm not part of that that group. But you know, Aaron, like you've talked before. You and I love to talk about like things about like uncertainty and stuff like that. But there's growth opportunities in uncertainties, and so how do you think like companies should use some of this chaos to kind of outmaneuver some of their competitors? Because there's an opportunity around every corner here.
There really is. I mean, I don't think the marketplace is going to shrink that precipitously. You know, as a small business in particular, I'm not really worried about budgetary changes across administrations, provided we have a budget. You know, it goes up a little, it goes down a little. All that's fine, but the size of the marketplace is so big that as a small company, that weather is never going to reach me. So it's still, you know, an excellent place to run a business. It's an excellent marketplace to be in. But that uncertainty is going to Sam's point earlier, it's not going to make anything faster. It's going to make things slower. So I'm going to pivot just a little bit and be more proactive in engaging government contracting people, small business officers, if I can find them, and customers, and try to show them, you know, recommended options that they can pursue based on what I understand are today's sets of rules, and guide them in directions that will be competitively favorable for me. That influencing idea is not new in our business, but the importance of it is maybe becoming stronger in the current environment.
Yeah, no, exactly. So there are definitely things that we can continue to do, and some of the best practices are in play right now, and they're even more relevant in today's environment. So we do have a question here, and so for the attendees, I think Chloe had mentioned earlier when we started, we're taking questions as you go along, so don't be shy. We like to riff off the top of our heads here, you know, so we think quickly on our feet. But there is a question about how comprehensive do you think the industry comments on issues like the rule of two and other changes to the FAR will be, and how much consolidation will the FAR Council give to the comments, particularly, how much consideration will the FAR Council give to the comments, particularly from industry groups?
Ordinarily, it would be a lot. Yeah, the FAR Council used to, when I was the representative from SBA, dole out the different sections to teams that would read all the comments and respond individually to each comment. I doubt that's still the same process because these teams have not been involved on the overhaul, but perhaps they still will go through the process of reading and responding to each comment. The important thing about comments when it gets to the notice and comment stage, we're not there yet. And Jeff Kosis, the career official at GSA, came out online and said they won't get to the notice and comment until the furlough ends. But say the furlough ends, they go out with the official notice and comment process. The important thing is the comments are public. When you submit a comment on regulations.gov, that's available for everybody else to see. So that creates a record that if, you know, there's like 99% comments against a particular change, then somebody can come back to that maybe after this FAR overhaul is done and say, let's go back and change this to the way that the public wanted it to be. So even if you don't think the FAR overhaul is going to read it, which, you know, still they might, but even if you don't think they're not going to read it, it's still important to submit the comment so that everybody else sees what the comment is. It's not a democracy. It's not that, you know, 99 out of 100 people say this, but everybody else is going to see that, okay, this is the way public sentiment is going, and perhaps we should reconsider it.
Yeah, I think more comments the better, especially when you add to a current comment or an issue, right? Like it shows that you're not alone, and potentially, there is something flawed or a solution, that we might be able to come at it from a group perspective. So good to know. So leave your names and do not call out people when making comments, because they will be public. So don't put in print anything that you don't want other people to see. Aaron, anything else to add to that before we go to our next question?
No, I think talking to the GovCon attorney is exactly the right idea there. Go ahead and engage anyway. Send that in.
Yeah.
I'm not as optimistic as I might normally be that they're going to listen to industry. I think there's some other forces at play there, but definitely send them in. Not so much the recommendations of, hey, change this, turn that, more so the, hey, understand the impact of what you're doing here.
Yes.
If you make that change, this is going to be an outcome. Have you thought that part through? See what that does.
Yeah, very true. So we have another question here. Are 8A sole source awards a thing anymore? As a relatively early 8A, what should my BD strategy be? More partnerships and mentor protege situations? Question mark, Aaron?
Wonderful. The answer is yes. It should still be a part of your plan, but let me speak with the voice of SBA here. It shouldn't be your only approach for revenue. If all you're doing is targeting direct awards, you may run into some bumpy road ahead. I definitely encourage you to accelerate the pace at which you learn how to compete. Consider subcontracting opportunities as well as part of that mix. This is not a choose one thing. You can really do a bit of all of the above. Mentor protege is a kind of different set of considerations, but yeah, that can also be part of that mix as well. If you're doing that, that can be a whole session on its own, but I urge caution in racing into a mentor protege arrangement. You want to date a while before you marry and make sure that you really understand each other before contemplating forming what is a third legal entity between your two companies. We are still, offering direct award options for our customers. We'll see how that goes. If they are getting guidance and direction saying, no, you really must compete that, okay, then we will get to compete for it. The rub is that the direct awards, they're easy. And so for a contracting officer who is overworked and harried and behind schedule, they're going to look for those expeditious paths, and the direct award is one of the best tools available in their toolkit. If they are forced to compete, then their timeline is going to stretch out quite a lot longer. And, we've seen the government procurement cycle go on. Here's where those staffing cuts will make things go even slower yet. That's hard. It's hard for them. So to get the goods and services that they need timely, to take that tool out of the toolkit is going to be a challenge. So for the moment, we are pressing ahead, but we are also accelerating our own efforts to prepare for that day when we have to compete.
Yeah. And so, Sam, the question did bring up the question about mentor proteges. And I would add even joint ventures into this mix too. There are some FAR changes and updates to that. Like, how do some of the changes impact that type of relationship?
The joint venture program is growing every single year. It's 10x since SBA changed it in 2016. And that seems like it's only going to get larger because as agencies move to best in class and required use and category management, there's only so many contractors that are on these vehicles. So you need to partner with companies in order to get access to these new orders that are coming out, vehicles that have limited subscription. What Aaron said was really interesting, because you do have this tension between, on one hand, the FAR is saying, oh, you need to go and compete things, don't use 8A sole source as much. But on the other hand, there are just fewer people around to do the competitions. So the tendency will be, let's try to get this done as quickly as possible. And 8A sole source is the fastest way to do that. Now you have other things on the horizon, OTAs and CSOs, but 8A sole source has traditionally been what agencies are using as they get to August and September and the end of the fiscal year and trying to get awards out. So we'll see how that works out. Are agencies really going to compete it? Now, if everything moves to GSA, then GSA probably will try to compete things because that's what they're being told to do in the FAR overhaul. But if the money and the process stay with individual contracting agencies, then you may see 8A sole source continue and really not have that much of a change. To the mentor protege point, I think it's still very important to look at mentor protege joint ventures, but as Aaron said, you gotta date before you marry. We've seen a lot of issues with mentor protege. SBA has been asking a lot of questions about it, so you have to be very careful as you enter into those relationships.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think we're gonna close out here. We've got just about like 5 more minutes. So if there are other attendee questions, I highly recommend that you go ahead and add those. We can have time for one more question. But as we wait for that, I wanna kind of talk about the shutdown here a little bit, right? I'm not going to ask you when you think it's all, like we've got this little magic 8 ball. I've got a little betting pool on the side as to when I think it's going to get lifted. But it's really kind of impacted acquisitions here from a number of different fronts. I'm seeing it across the board, with the shutdown. So what happens when the lights get turned back on with the FAR overhaul, and what should companies do to prepare for when the lights get turned on, right? Are there things that we should do now, or is it a sit and wait, go take a vacation and wait until, that happens? So that's a loaded question. I don't even know who I want to start with first.
Pick one.
Well, I'll mention, doesn't really answer your question, but I was in the government for 17 years. I went through several shutdowns, and for one of them, I was a manager of my office. And when I came back from the shutdown, a few people from my staff had gotten new jobs during the course of the shutdown. It's probably even more likely now because people are missing their paychecks.
Yeah.
So you may come back whenever it is, 2, 3 weeks, a month, and then the contracting officer that was on the other side, the program official that was on the other side is gone now. And there's really nobody else in place because it's not like they came up with a contingency plan. It's not like they had some sort of transition plan for these people. I sometimes think, is that one of the reasons that they're going through this? They tried to get people to take the DRP, they did RIFs during the Doge cuts. The easiest way to get people to go out and find new jobs is stop paying them. And that seems to be what's happening right now.
I never even thought about that.
Not a lot of shutdowns to go by, but this one is, it's lengthy, it's unusual. I'm not particularly optimistic or personally optimistic about resolution, but you won't see things go back to normal on the first day. There is going to be some buildup. So, to your question, what do we do while we're waiting? These breaks are relatively rare. I would be attacking hard right now on all the preparatory things that I can do. I want my bid library caught up to date. I want all my reuse materials set to go. If I'm implementing AI tools, I want to run tests, get those things perfected so that we are ready to come out hot when the government's ready for us. Some companies are pivoting state and local, looking at that. That's fine for things to keep bidding on. And, there are RFPs coming out still. The pace is off quite a lot, but, take a look at those ones that are out right now and maybe consider going after some of those as well.
Yeah. There is some action. Navy is very busy right now. There are a lot of opportunities that are kind of in process. They're getting delayed. So that's very similar to what I'm seeing from my point too. So I think we're going to be wrapping up here in a few minutes, but I think the FAR overhaul is a little bit more than just like a compliance update. It really does touch and impact a number of different fronts, not only the professionals that are there to kind of execute and, make sure that acquisitions run smoothly, but it's really kind of a reset for how we bid and strategize and, do our BD and our captures. And so I know I was having a little bit of fun with the title about, stop whining and, start winning. But, I think that we all need to kind of give everybody a little bit of grace and some understanding, and we're kind of all in this together as a team, and so I think we're all kind of in the same boat. So if you think that things are bad for you, but things are probably pretty bad for other people, and we just need to kind of spend some time to kind of uplift everybody. But before we close out here, some last parting thoughts from both of you on the overhaul, the current environment, and however you want to sign off here today. So Sam, I'll start off with you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks
all
again
right,
to
Sam.
Visible Thread for having this panel. The this FAR overhaul is moving very fast. There's a lot of change. Described it as companies having whiplash from going back and forth from policies. I write about this on GovCon Intelligence. Please go ahead and subscribe or follow me on LinkedIn, and look forward to speaking again with everybody.
Great. Thanks so much, Sam. Aaron?
My big takeaway for everyone today: read. Read GovCon Intelligence. Follow your podcast, Ton's 2 Cents. Hit them up on LinkedIn. Watch those folks. You can send me a note through LinkedIn as well, and I will share with you the things that I track and read every day. In this environment of a lot of change, best thing we can do is just devour data, assimilate what we're seeing, and try to find the truth in that. And then my parting shot is, Sam, I'm stealing the Shakespearean drama thing from you. I appreciate that.
Love it. This is Hamlet.
Oh, there you go. And so, yes, this is Ton here. I'm going to get the last word in because, it's my Ton's 2 cents here. But I would say that have some sense of humor as you go through this. Please follow me on my podcast. We have conversations all the time about some very candid ways of being strategic. But you're right. I do not like to read, but the way that you present content, Sam, makes it very easily digestible. And there are several other people. So for the attendees here, if you do reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, please make sure that you add a note that, you met me or you watched the episode here today. Otherwise, I may not accept your invite to connect because I'm a little snooty about LinkedIn connections because there's way too many bots on LinkedIn anymore. But it's this in current environment has made me want to read more, makes me have to read more. And so I think, it's one of those necessary things today. So, but at least it's interesting. So I really hope that our audience had an enjoyable session, that we learned a lot of things. And Chloe, I'll throw it back to you then.
Yes, and I want to know if for our viewers, if you scroll up in the attendee chat right now, you will see that I added our speakers' LinkedIn profiles. So please do connect with them, let them know what you thought of this session. Thank you everybody for joining us for the first session of today, and thank you to our amazing speakers for such a great conversation. Please make sure to fill out the survey on the right side of your screen and leave any feedback that you may have for Ton, Aaron, and Sam. The full agenda with all links for today is available on the console below in the free content box. Once this session ends, you will be automatically redirected to the next session, which is the evolving role of a bid writer. That session is beginning in the next 2 minutes. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks everyone.